The realm of ancient Greek mythology, a tapestry woven with timeless narratives, invites exploration into its most captivating and often overlooked corners. These are not merely stories, but echoes from thousands of years past, carefully preserved through generations akin to cherished soft lullabies. As the world outside quiets, an opportunity arises to embark upon a slow and gentle journey, allowing the day's clamour to recede and a sense of profound calm to settle. Indeed, this particular odyssey promises a departure from the dramatic, action-packed renditions frequently encountered. Instead, the focus will meticulously shift towards the quietest moments, the most delicate nuances, and the serene interludes often eclipsed by the grandeur of epic events. It is an invitation to wander, unhurried, through ancient, echoing caves where one might imagine overhearing the hushed exchanges between formidable deities and their mortal counterparts, revealing a side of myth rarely contemplated. To fully embrace this unique experience, a subtle transformation of one's immediate environment is suggested, dimming the ambient lighting and perhaps introducing a gentle rhythmic hum such as that from a fan can further enhance the atmosphere. With these preparations complete, the path is cleared for an immersive descent into the tranquil, often sleepy world of Greek mythology. One might endeavour to visualize a place of unparalleled stillness, a profound quietude far exceeding the hush of a bedroom in the deepest hours of night. This is a silence so absolute that even the most subtle internal rhythms, like the beat of one's own heart, seem to resonate with a hushed reverence. It is precisely within such an ethereal setting that the narrative now directs its attention, guiding the exploration towards the fabled hidden sanctuary of Hypnos, the benevolent deity of slumber. While modern contemplation might often relegate sleep to a mere biological necessity, the ancient Greeks possessed a far more profound understanding. They recognized that a force as pervasive and potent as slumber, capable of leveling the distinctions between kings and beggars, or even halting the most formidable warrior mid-action, transcended a simple physiological state. Such an elemental power, they reasoned, must surely be embodied by a divine presence. This profound realization led them to personify this universal phenomenon, attributing its gentle dominion to the god Hypnos. His sacred grotto, so legend tells, was situated at the very periphery of the known world, a liminal space where the vibrant hues of day seamlessly dissolved into the velvet embrace of night, much like honey melting languidly into warm milk. This entrance, it was said, had never been graced by the sun's illuminating touch, nor had its ancient walls ever reverberated with the intrusion of harsh, discordant sounds. Ancient lore instructed seekers to trace the course of the river Lethe, the fabled stream of forgetfulness, its waters flowing with such an imperceptible slowness that their movement bordered on an almost complete cessation, guiding one inevitably to this hallowed, hidden realm. As one draws near to this hallowed ground, an instinctive hush would naturally descend upon their steps. The very atmosphere appears to thicken with impalpable drowsiness, creating an impression akin to moving through ethereal curtains woven from the most exquisite silk. Here, wild poppies flourish, not the vivid crimson varieties often envisioned, but rather ethereal, pale blossoms, their heavy heads swaying in a breeze so subtle it is almost imperceptible. The cave's entrance unfolds, not with the menacing sharpness of a mythical beast's maw, but with a gentle, rounded curve, reminiscent of a threshold smoothed by an eternity of time. Every surface within is softly cushioned by verdant moss, and minute droplets of water descend with such infrequency that each soft plink resonates like the distant solitary chime of a bell from a temple long forgotten. Within, the grotto's expanse seems to stretch far beyond the limits of visual perception. This illusion of limitless depth stems not from its physical dimensions, but from the gentle, pervasive influence that causes an observer's eyelids to grow pleasantly heavy. The ancient walls curve with an inherent grace, appearing almost to pulse with a subtle rhythm that harmonizes with one's own internal cadence. And there, nestled at the absolute heart of this profoundly serene domain, reposes Hypnos himself, the very embodiment of tranquil slumber. The unfolding narrative now reveals a captivating detail, one that gently stirs curiosity. Hypnos, it emerges, was not the sole inhabitant of his secluded sanctuary. Scattered gracefully around him, like countless children who had succumbed to slumber during an enchanting bedtime story, rested his 1,000 sons. Each of these ethereal offspring embodied a distinct and unique facet of the dream world, guardians of specific nocturnal visions. Among this vast progeny resided Morpheus, whose extraordinary ability allowed him to assume any human guise within the realm of dreams, excelling particularly in manifesting as cherished individuals residing in distant lands, bringing comfort and connection across great distances. Adjacent to him slumbered Isolus, a master of animalistic visions, capable of conjuring vivid experiences of soaring with majestic eagles or traversing moonlit forests alongside swift wolves. And then there was Phantasos, perhaps the most enigmatic of the siblings, whose domain was to populate dreams with objects that defied earthly existence, impossible constructs that, within the logic of the dream, held an undeniable, fleeting coherence. Yet a fascinating revelation emerges concerning Hypnos himself. Despite his divine dominion over sleep, he was not perpetually ensconced in slumber. On occasion, when the tranquillity of his grotto reached its most profound zenith, he would slowly, almost imperceptibly, rouse himself to meticulously tend to his unique garden of poppies. His movements were akin to a dancer submerged in water, each gesture flowing seamlessly into the next, meticulously avoiding any abrupt motion that might ripple the pristine quietude of his domain. His cultivation was unlike any other garden known to mortals or gods. The poppies within grew in perfectly aligned, drowsy rows, their very existence exuding a calming aura. When their delicate petals eventually detached, they did not perish. Instead, they simply softened further, drifting downwards with the exquisite slowness of feathers released from a pillow fight in an impossibly gentle breeze. Hypnos would carefully gather these precious petals into a basket intricately woven from the very fabric of dreams, reserving them for those nights when the mortal world above teemed with excessive noise, gnawing anxiety, or an overwhelming burden of worry that prevented natural slumber. Hypnos, it becomes clear, held a profound responsibility, far exceeding the common perception of his divine duties. His purpose transcended the mere inducement of fatigue. It was in essence the bestowal of genuine, profound rest, a restorative balm capable of mending both the physical body and the weary spirit. Each evening, as the sun commenced its slow descent in the world above, casting long, fading shadows, Hypnos would meticulously prepare for his sacred task, much like a master craftsman readying his most delicate instruments. From his unique basket brimming with dream petals, he would thoughtfully choose the precise ones, tailored specifically for each individual in need of his gentle ministration. For a mother burdened by worry, he might select petals imbued with visions of her children thriving, secure, and joyful. For an elder yearning for the days of his youth, petals that unfurled tender recollections of endless summer afternoons. And for a child apprehensive of the encroaching darkness, petals designed to paint dreams in the most comforting, soft, golden light. However, a truly astonishing aspect of Hypnos' power, one that commanded the respect and even awe of the other Olympian deities, lies in his singular ability to induce slumber in none other than Zeus himself. Yes, Zeus, the formidable king of the gods, the wielder of thunderbolts, the sovereign commander of the very skies, would inevitably find his mighty eyelids growing heavy, his formidable will yielding, whenever Hypnos deemed it, time for the supreme ruler to rest. This extraordinary feat, chronicled in the ancient sagas, occurred on two distinct occasions, both orchestrated by Hera, the powerful queen of the gods and Zeus's formidable consort. Hera, known for her strong will, often found herself at odds with her husband's decrees. Yet direct confrontation with the king of Olympus was fraught with peril. Consequently, she would discreetly seek out Hypnos in his tranquil grotto, making a most courteous request for his gentle intervention, humbly inquiring if he might consider bestowing a temporary slumber upon Zeus. During the initial instance of this momentous task, Hypnos harboured considerable apprehension. To induce sleep in Zeus without explicit permission was an act fraught with divine repercussions, a transgression that could invite severe punishment upon a lesser deity. However, Hera, in her persuasive cunning, pledged to bestow upon him one of the radiant graces as a wife, a reward of such incomparable beauty and prestige that it proved utterly irresistible. Thus, Hypnos embarked on his clandestine ascent to Mount Olympus, gliding through the grand marble halls with the silent subtlety of mist, and with an almost imperceptible breath, he gently enshrouded the king of the gods in profound slumber. Zeus, under Hypnos' potent spell, succumbed to such an extraordinary depth of sleep that he remained entirely oblivious to Hera's subsequent machinations, a circumstance that was perhaps fortunate for all involved. Upon his eventual awakening, a thunderous realization dawned, igniting within him a fierce, unbridled fury. He scoured every corner of Olympus, intent on locating Hypnos and meting out a severe reprisal. Yet, here lies the ingenious twist. Hypnos, anticipating the divine wrath, had already retreated to the safety of his grotto, and found refuge in the protective embrace of his primordial mother, Nyx, the very goddess of night. Even Zeus, in his boundless power, harboured a profound reverence, bordering on fear, for Nyx. Night, after all, predated the Olympian gods, representing a fundamental, ancient force far more elemental than their fleeting rules or momentary angers. Thus, confronted with Hypnos shielded by the very essence of darkness, Zeus was compelled to withdraw, his fury quelled. Hypnos remained secure, nestled within the shadows, much like a child finding ultimate safety beneath the covers during a raging storm. When Hera, on a subsequent occasion, once again sought his aid, Hypnos displayed an entirely understandable reluctance. "Do you recall the repercussions of our last endeavour?" he cautiously inquired, a clear memory of Zeus's wrath lingering. Yet Hera's resolve was unwavering, her persistence a force unto itself. This time she presented an even more magnificent inducement, a resplendent golden throne, crafted with such divine durability that it would never yield, accompanied by a footstool forged by the unparalleled artistry of Hephaestus himself. This exquisite furniture, it was promised, would possess such inherent beauty and comfort that merely resting upon it would impart a profound sense of peace to any being, whether god or mortal. And so, with renewed caution, Hypnos once more undertook his silent pilgrimage to Olympus. This time, his approach was even more meticulously planned. He assumed the delicate form of a small bird, perching discreetly in a tall pine tree positioned just beyond Zeus's window. From this vantage point he began to sing the most exquisitely soft lullaby ever conceived, a melody seemingly woven from the gentle whisper of sighs and the caress of soft breezes. Under its hypnotic influence, Zeus's formidable eyelids slowly grew heavy, his mighty head gradually bowed forward, and very soon the king of the gods was immersed in the deepest, most profoundly peaceful slumber he had ever known. Yet, beyond the immediate narrative of Hera's stratagem or Zeus's temporary deception, lies a profound and truly captivating insight. The essence of these tales resonates with the incredible, undeniable power of rest itself. It underscores a universal truth. Even the most formidable being in the cosmos, the very king of the gods, required the restorative balm of sleep. Even a deity capable of commanding lightning and shaking the earth with his wrath ultimately had to yield to the subtle, inescapable touch of Hypnos. Back within the serene confines of his grotto, Hypnos would occasionally pause from tending his eternal garden to reflect upon these extraordinary adventures, while other deities garnered renown through dramatic sagas of epic battles, perilous quests, passionate love affairs, and fearsome retributions. Hypnos possessed a uniquely profound power. His was the ability to bestow peace upon any soul, in any location, at any given moment. His cave, therefore, endured as a sanctuary existing beyond the conventional flow of time, a realm where anxieties dissipated like sugar dissolving in water, and the most daunting problems receded into distant, diminished concerns. Mortals fortunate enough to stumble upon this elusive sanctuary, a rare occurrence typically reserved for those deeply lost in dense forests, or profoundly adrift within their own contemplative minds, consistently recounted it as the most profoundly restful haven they had ever encountered. They spoke of moss that cradled them more softly than the most luxurious beds, of an air imbued with the soothing essence of lavender and the invigorating freshness of rain. Merely inhaling within its confines, they claimed, caused their shoulders to release all tension and their minds to achieve an unparalleled stillness. Indeed, some whispered that a single hour spent within Hypnos's cave offered a rejuvenation far surpassing an entire week of conventional sleep, an ultimate promise of profound tranquility. The visions that graced the slumber of visitors within that hallowed sanctuary were utterly distinct from all others. These were not the fragmented, perplexing narratives characteristic of common nocturnal repose, but rather lucid, tranquil accounts that appeared meticulously tailored for each individual. Dreams of gliding serenely over placid ocean expanses might unfold, or perhaps intimate conversations with cherished departed loved ones. Others could find themselves wandering through exquisite botanical havens where every blossom resonated with an ethereal, harmonious melody. As the exploration of this serene subterranean grotto draws to its conclusion, an observer might find themselves pondering a particular conundrum. In an era brimming with deities who imperiously demanded worship and sacrificial offerings, who frequently erupted in volatile displays of temper and instigated devastating conflicts, why did Hypnos remain content merely to exist in quietude within his concealed dwelling, seeking nothing more than the opportunity to bestow rest upon the world? It is conceivable that his placid demeanour stemmed from a profound insight overlooked by his divine brethren, the realization that occasionally the most potent action one can undertake is not to intervene directly, but simply to be present, to extend solace without imposition, and to gently impress upon all beings, both celestial and mortal, that even amidst the most frenetic and turbulent existences, an inviolable sanctuary for peace invariably remains. And perhaps, just perhaps, that profound principle offers invaluable guidance for all as they retreat into their individual tranquil moments this evening, contemplating the dreams that might visit them during the gentle hours ahead, and considering the deeper narratives that slumber itself might impart, should one attend with sufficient diligence to discern its subtle whispered wisdom. There exists a particular sensation, akin to awakening from a dream about a locale that felt utterly tangible, only to find the precise particulars perpetually eluding memory, a delicate pang of wistfulness, much like endeavouring to retain water within cupped palms. This exact sentiment often pervades individuals upon their initial encounter with the legendary tale of Atlantis. However, for the present narrative, the aim is to journey leisurely through this fabled isle, not as it ultimately vanished beneath the ocean's expanse, but rather as it thrived in its serene, quotidian existence prior to the dramatic events, before the climactic conclusion indelibly etched in collective consciousness. The Chronicle of Atlantis originates with Plato, an eminent Hellenic philosopher who flourished approximately 2 millennia and 4 centuries past. He did not recount it as an explicit mythological account, but rather as a conceptual exploration veiled within an archaic narrative. One might envision him reposing beneath the dappled shade of an olive tree, expounding to his disciples upon the essence of ideal commonwealths and the inherent perils of unchecked authority. The golden afternoon light would gently permeate the foliage, and in the nearby vicinity a spring would murmur melodiously as he meticulously crafted his compelling story. Yet let the focus now diverge from the philosophical discourse, and instead envision traversing the authentic thoroughfares of Atlantis on an unremarkable Tuesday morning, a time when no extraordinary occurrences transpired, and its inhabitants merely pursued their customary daily activities. The sun's rays would imbue the air with a pleasant warmth, though not an oppressive heat. A delicate zephyr would waft through the city, laden with the mingled fragrances of blooming flora and the briny ocean. And somewhere in the remote background, the joyful peals of children at play would resonate faintly. The paramount feature that would immediately capture an observer's attention concerning Atlantis was the meticulous precision with which every element had been organized. The entirety of the insular domain was constructed in impeccable concentric circles reminiscent of a bullseye meticulously rendered by an individual possessing boundless endurance. At its absolute core reposed the majestic royal palace, enveloped by a terrestrial band, succeeded by an aquatic channel, then another terrestrial band, and so forth, extending outwards towards the bustling harbour, where vessels arriving from diverse global locales swayed softly in the early morning currents. These, however, were no mere ordinary circular formations. Each successive ring was interconnected with its counterparts through an intricate network of bridges and subterranean passages meticulously sculpted from contrasting black and white stone. This design produced a visual tapestry that, when observed from the elevated terrain encircling the metropolis, resembled colossal checkerboard patterns. The aquatic tunnels themselves were engineered with sufficient breadth to permit two maritime vessels to navigate past one another with ease, and their interior surfaces were adorned with polished brass that shimmered with a golden effulgence under the midday solar radiance. Traversing the outermost circular district during the nascent hours of the day, an observer would encounter fishermen meticulously tending to their fishing gear, their actions characterized by the deliberate, systematic rhythm of individuals whose craft had been inherited and perfected over countless generations. Their maritime vessels bore no resemblance to any others encountered in the ancient epoch, being fashioned from a distinctive arboreal material indigenous solely to Atlantis, a timber inherently impervious to saline degradation and seemingly immune to the processes of decay or fragmentation. These maritime workers would offer a courteous inclination of the head as an individual proceeded by, yet they would betray no particular astonishment at the presence of visitors. Indeed, inhabiting what was indisputably the world's foremost sophisticated society, foreign emissaries from distant shores naturally appeared somewhat rudimentary, not in a disparaging manner, it must be clarified, but rather with the detached perspective one might hold for an individual labouring with an abacus when a calculating device is readily available. Their self-assurance was understated, a comfortable certainty, characteristic of those who had never experienced the anxieties associated with procuring adequate sustenance or secure habitation. Progressing towards the interior, into the second concentric ring, one would traverse the initial bridge and step into the bustling merchant quarter, where the genuine marvels of Atlantean ingenuity were undeniably manifest. A noteworthy observation arises here. The Atlanteans had successfully engineered solutions to challenges that would remain unresolved by other civilizations for millennia. Their architectural marvels incorporated piped water in every edifice, not merely for potable consumption, but also heated water for ablutions. Furthermore, they possessed an efficient epistolary network capable of transmitting communications to any corner of the island within a mere few hours. They even utilized mechanisms akin to vertical transporters, employing a sophisticated arrangement of counterweights and pulleys to convey individuals and commodities between levels with remarkable ease. However, a truly astonishing aspect would undoubtedly emerge. Notwithstanding the entirety of their technological prowess, the rhythm of daily existence within Atlantis progressed at an unexpectedly unhurried tempo. Its citizens did not scurry about with the frantic urgency characteristic of those with pressing engagements. Rather, they ambled leisurely along the expansive avenues, pausing to engage in convivial conversation with fellow residents, to scrutinize wares displayed in the bustling forum, or simply to recline upon exquisitely sculpted seating and observe the unfolding panorama of daily life. This phenomenon arose from a profound realization the Atlanteans had achieved, a concept that contemporary societies continue to grapple with: the harmonious coexistence of operational effectiveness and profound tranquility. Their sophisticated infrastructure did not precipitate a more frenetic pace of life. On the contrary, it fostered an environment of greater repose. When one is liberated from the daily expenditure of numerous hours on fundamental subsistence endeavors, an abundance of time becomes available for contemplation, for artistic innovation, and simply for a mindful engagement with one's own existence. Within the vibrant marketplace situated in the second concentric zone, merchants offered an array of exotic fruits cultivated exclusively on Atlantis, unknown elsewhere on the planet. Among these were apples that retained their pristine freshness for extended months without any signs of deterioration, and grapes whose flavor profiles subtly varied depending on the hour of their consumption. Additionally, a distinctive variety of bread was produced from grain harvested from submerged fields irrigated by controlled flooding surrounding the island. This particular bread possessed a subtly saccharine, nutty essence, and a consistency so ethereal it appeared to melt upon the palate, much like ephemeral sea foam. The agrarian populace of Atlantis had mastered the art of coexisting harmoniously with the marine environment, rather than contending against its forces. They had pioneered an ingenious methodology of regulated inundation, which served to fertilize their arable land and yield harvests of astonishing excellence and copious volume. During the period of collection, these cultivated expanses would be systematically dewatered, and brigades of labourers would then traverse the fertile, saturated earth, amassing a bounty that sustained not only Atlantis itself, but also a significant portion of the Mediterranean basin. As one proceeded further into the heart of the city, advancing towards the third concentric ring, an individual would traverse one of those extraordinary architectural marvels, a bridge whose passage imparted the sensation of transitioning between disparate realms. The aqueous expanse beneath was so profoundly pellucid that schools of fish could be distinctly observed gliding idly, their iridescent scales reflecting the ambient illumination akin to a scattering of precious coinage. The Atlanteans had meticulously cultivated these aquatic creatures for their exceptional aesthetic appeal and docile temperament, and the act of nourishing them had evolved into a cherished diversion for both youthful and mature inhabitants. The third circular district served as the vibrant hub for the adept artisans. It was here, demonstrably, that the intrinsic brilliance of Atlantean civilization manifested with undeniable clarity. These individuals were not merely fabricators of utilitarian items. Rather, they were consummate artists whose creative endeavors incidentally produced objects of practical utility. A humble water carafe, for instance, would be sculpted and adorned with such exquisite artistry that it might readily grace a curatorial display, yet simultaneously perform its function flawlessly, maintaining its contents refreshingly chilled even on the most scorching of days. The metallurgists of Atlantis had unearthed orichalcum, a remarkable alloy found in no other terrestrial location. It was characterized as possessing a worth nearly commensurate with gold, yet proving more versatile. exhibiting greater tensile strength than bronze and surpassing silver in aesthetic appeal. Furthermore, it possessed the extraordinary characteristic of emitting a subtle, intrinsic luminescence. Its application extended beyond mere ornamentation, encompassing utilitarian functions such as conduits for water and structural reinforcements, thereby imparting a delicate, shimmering radiance to the entire urban landscape during the crepuscular periods. A revelation that might indeed astonish an observer concerning Atlantean society arises here. Notwithstanding their considerable affluence and advanced technological capabilities, they exhibited no preoccupation with opulence as an end in itself. Rather, they appeared to grasp that the most profound form of luxury resided in possessing ample leisure and tranquillity to savour unadorned delights. Households, for instance, would dedicate entire afternoons to their private horticultural spaces, not driven by an obligation to cultivate the flora, but by a genuine inclination to witness the unfolding process of natural growth. As one progressed towards the innermost concentric sectors, the prominent presence of the temples and academies would become discernible, institutions that elevated Atlantis beyond mere technological advancement to a state of profound sagacity. The Atlanteans venerated Poseidon, the formidable deity of the oceans, yet their edifices of worship were far from the sombre, enigmatic structures one might anticipate. Conversely, they presented as luminous, expansive constructions where saline currents meandered through intricately designed floor channels, generating an unceasing, soothing murmur of flowing water that appeared to effortlessly dissipate all anxieties and mental burdens. Their educational institutions, it could be argued, surpassed even the magnificence of their sacred temples. Within their hallowed walls, young minds were not merely indoctrinated with factual knowledge and practical competencies, but were meticulously guided in the art of critical thought and the principles of virtuous living. Their curriculum spanned the rigorous disciplines of mathematics and advanced engineering, certainly, yet it also embraced the expressive arts of music and the profound inquiries of philosophy, alongside the vital studies of agriculture and the celestial observations of astronomy. The overarching objective was to cultivate individuals who could contribute multifaceted talents to their civilization, possessing a profound understanding of how every disparate element of their complex society interconnected and functioned harmoniously. However, it is at this juncture that the narrative subtly shifts its register, much like the imperceptible gathering of clouds that gradually obscures the brilliance of a perfect summer's day. As the generations succeeded one another, a segment of the Atlantean populace began to perceive their flawlessly constructed society as an inherent entitlement, rather than a legacy to be cherished. The offspring who had matured amidst the comforts of readily available running water, the efficiency of advanced transportation networks, the abundance of nourishing provisions, and the splendor of architectural marvels, grew to harbor the conviction that such an elevated standard of existence was simply the natural order of the world. Consequently, they began to foster the belief that their unparalleled achievements stemmed from an innate superiority over other human collectives, rather than being the culmination of diligent effort, collaborative spirit, and fortuitous circumstances. A growing faction among them started to rationalize that if Atlantis truly outshone every other land, then perhaps it was their inherent right to exert dominion over those less advanced regions as well. This was an insidious transformation in their collective mindset, akin to the relentless accumulation of sand against a coastal barrier, subtly yet irrevocably altering the very contours of the shoreline over time. This is precisely where Plato's profound narrative transcends a mere historical account, evolving into a cautionary tale against the perilous allure of hubris and unbridled ambition. The Atlanteans gradually turned their gaze outwards, not with intentions of benevolent exchange, but with a burgeoning desire for territorial expansion and subjugation, thereby forsaking the tenets of peaceful wisdom that had originally underpinned their society's extraordinary ascendancy. They redirected their immense resources towards constructing formidable warships instead of modest fishing vessels, dedicating their training regimens to the cultivation of soldiers rather than the nurturing of philosophers, and fundamentally redefining their societal worth by the measure of what they could forcibly appropriate from others, rather than by the collective ingenuity and cooperative spirit applied to their own creations. Now, as articulated by Plato, this profound alteration in their disposition was far from an abrupt occurrence. It was a painstakingly slow process, much like the gradual encroachment of wild growth that overtakes a meticulously maintained garden when it is neglected. Each succeeding generation exhibited a marginally increased propensity for conflict than its predecessor. The subsequent generation became even more deeply entrenched in the conviction of its own inherent eminence, and the generation following that began to perceive the act of seizing what they coveted from other nations not merely as an allowable action, but as an undeniable prerogative. The divine pantheon, with Zeus in particular, observed this escalating moral decay with mounting apprehension. The Atlanteans were progressively transforming into an entity they were never destined to embody. Colossal bullies, wielding their extraordinary gifts and advanced capabilities not for the betterment of humanity, but for its detriment. It was a scenario comparable to witnessing a cherished offspring mature into a figure of cruelty and self-absorption, inflicting profound sorrow upon all who had once harboured immense pride in their former virtues. And so, within the span of a single cataclysmic day and night, the magnificent civilization of Atlantis was utterly subsumed by the encroaching ocean, not as an act of divine wrath according to Plato's interpretation, but rather as an expression of profound sorrow, much in the way one might tenderly set aside a beloved, exquisitely crafted toy that has been damaged beyond any hope of repair. The very foundations of the earth convulsed with violent tremors, the sea swelled with unprecedented fury, and the most sophisticated civilization the world had ever known vanished without a trace, as though its existence had been a mere phantom. Yet the truly compelling dimension of this conclusion lies in its deeper philosophical implication. Plato was not primarily recounting the saga of a physically lost civilization. His true purpose was to deliver a potent discourse on the profound implications of societal choices, illustrating how even the most ideally structured community can precipitate its own ruin if its inhabitants abandon the fundamental principles and values that were the bedrock of its initial greatness. The conceptual Atlantis in Plato's philosophical framework was not a specific geographical location. It was rather an aspirational ideal of what human society could achieve through the harmonious integration of collective wisdom and equitable governance. And the authentic tragedy was not its watery interment, but its internal metamorphosis from a paragon of beauty into an embodiment of ugliness. The physical obliteration was merely the manifest symbol of a profound spiritual disintegration that had already taken root. The Atlantis that succumbed to the ocean's embrace was in essence already deceased. What the waves ultimately reclaimed was but an empty husk of what had once been a veritable paradise. As contemplatively we envision the tranquil expanse of waters where Atlantis once proudly stood, one might reflect upon the enduring wisdom this ancient allegory continues to impart. In our contemporary epoch, endowed with technological marvels that would have appeared as pure sorcery to our ancient forebears, do we harness these formidable tools to cultivate greater sagacity and global harmony, or do we unwittingly foster increased distraction and pervasive discord? Are our collective endeavours directed towards constructing bridges of understanding between diverse peoples, or are we instead erecting impenetrable walls of division? And perhaps, amidst the gentle rhythmic lapping of waves upon distant shores, we can still discern a faint echo of Atlantis's potential, not as a paradise forever lost to the annals of time, but as a poignant reminder that the creation of paradise is an ongoing endeavour, one that each successive generation must consciously elect to undertake day by day, decision by deliberate decision, with the same patient and meticulous devotion that the Atlanteans once applied to tending their legendary underwater gardens, before they tragically forgot that the most invaluable treasures are those intangible virtues that can never be seized through brute force or coercion. Indeed, much like Atlantis serves as a powerful reminder that even the most impeccably crafted constructs are susceptible to transformation, so too does it suggest that change itself can sometimes be a perfect, albeit initially challenging, phenomenon. It is often the case that the most profound and significant metamorphoses unfold with such imperceptible slowness that their onset is barely registered. This gradual unfolding is precisely how the season of autumn commences, is it not? One morning, upon stepping outdoors, one discerns a delicate, almost ethereal coolness in the air that was conspicuously absent the previous day. The foliage has yet to display its vibrant autumnal hues. The blossoms of summer continue to unfurl in full splendour, yet an indescribable, subtle alteration has permeated the very fabric of the surrounding world. The venerable Greek civilization, renowned for its rich mythology, offered a beautifully woven narrative to explain this gentle seasonal transition, and its genesis lies with a youthful goddess who was simply revelling in the serene ambience of an afternoon spent in a verdant meadow. This setting, while reminiscent of the tranquil, cultivated gardens of Atlantis, was inherently wilder, more elemental, imbued with the kind of untamed and spontaneous beauty that flourishes organically, entirely unburdened by human design or intervention. Her name was Persephone, and she was the cherished offspring of Demeter, the revered deity who presided over all forms of vegetative growth and the bounties of the harvest. Had one possessed the extraordinary fortune to behold Persephone on that momentous day, one would have been struck by the exquisite harmony with which she was integrated into the natural world enveloping her. When her laughter echoed through the air, the surrounding flowers seemed to burst forth with an even more radiant luminescence. As she glided through the verdant grasses, the blades beneath her feet appeared to deepen in their emerald hue. She possessed an ethereal grace of movement that imbued everything in her immediate vicinity with an amplified sense of vitality and an invigorated spirit of hope. Demeter, her protective mother, had meticulously nurtured her daughter within the terrestrial realm, amidst undulating hills and sun-drenched meadows, carefully shielding her from the darker, more perilous enclaves of the mythological cosmos. It was a profound, safeguarding form of maternal affection, akin to the careful cultivation of a precious garden in the most sheltered and advantageous location one can ascertain, ensuring it receives precisely the optimal measure of sunlight and refreshing rain, yet is never exposed to the harshness of excessive winds or the biting chill of frost. Demeter, in her wisdom, had witnessed firsthand the potential devastation that could befall exquisite entities when prematurely exposed to overwhelming perils. On this particular afternoon, Persephone was engaged in her most beloved pastime, leisurely traversing a sprawling meadow and gathering an assortment of blossoms. Yet these were no ordinary floral specimens. Each bloom she selected appeared to emanate a soft, inherent radiance, as if it contained a nascent spark of the sun's own essence within its delicate petals. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, meticulously choosing each flower, much in the manner of a discerning chef selecting the finest ingredients for an exceptional culinary creation, or an artist carefully choosing pigments for a seminal painting. The idyllic meadow through which she meandered was a sanctuary of profound tranquillity, permeated by the gentle, hypnotic hum of industrious bees and the distant, soothing murmur of a stream cascading over polished river stones. Butterflies, adorned in iridescent hues, flitted and danced around her like living jewels, and occasionally small birds would alight upon her shoulder, offering their melodious songs directly into her ear. It was a place where the conventional perception of time seemed to dissolve, where an entire hour could compress into the fleeting sensation of a minute, or conversely, a single minute could stretch into an eternity. Now, it is at this very point that the narrative takes an unforeseen turn, though not with the dramatic abruptness one might anticipate. As Persephone gracefully bent down to pluck a particularly exquisite narcissus flower, its pristine white petals encircling a luminous golden core, like a miniature sun exquisitely captured within a floral form, the ground beneath her feet began to subtly tremble. It started as a very gentle vibration, reminiscent of distant muffled thunder or the deep, resonant purring of an immense feline creature slumbering far beneath the earth's crust. Then, the earth itself parted, not in a violent, rending chasm, but more akin to stage curtains gracefully drawing open to reveal a hidden tableau, or like the slow, deliberate unfurling of a flower's petals to greet the dawn. From this newly formed aperture emerged Hades, the formidable deity of the underworld, seated in a magnificent chariot drawn by a team of jet-black horses. These steeds moved with an eerie silence, like corporeal shadows, their hooves making no sound whatsoever as they traversed the ground. It is a common misconception that Hades is merely a villainous figure in this ancient tale. However, this interpretation is not entirely accurate. He was not inherently malevolent, precisely rather he was profoundly solitary. One must endeavour to imagine an existence spent in perpetuity, surrounded solely by the spectral visages of the deceased, never basking in the warmth of sunlight, never hearing the joyful resonance of laughter, never experiencing the simple, profound contentment of witnessing life burgeon and flourish. His subterranean dominion was undeniably crucial and indispensable to the cosmic order, yet it was also a realm of unbearable isolation. Hades had, for a considerable span of time, been observing Persephone from his distant shadowed realm, and he had become captivated by her vibrant essence, her profound and undeniable connection to the very forces of life and growth. Yet, as the sovereign ruler of the dead, he possessed absolutely no comprehension of the delicate nuances of proper courtship. He was utterly unfamiliar with the gestures of offering flowers, arranging delightful picnics, or engaging in gentle, engaging conversation. Consequently, he resorted to the course of action that, to his isolated understanding, appeared most logical. He simply conveyed her to his underworld domain, operating under the assumption that she would, in due course, come to cherish it as deeply as he did. The descent into the underworld was not the terrifying, precipitous plunge one might readily conjure in the imagination. Instead, it was more akin to a gradual, almost dreamlike sinking through successive strata of the earth, each layer becoming progressively quieter and more dimly lit than the one above. Persephone, utterly captivated, observed with profound astonishment as they traversed vast caverns adorned with resplendent, glowing crystals, navigated subterranean rivers that defied all known physical laws by flowing upwards, and passed through ethereal gardens where shimmering silver flowers bloomed in an eternal, mystical twilight. Meanwhile, above the terrestrial plane, Demeter, the venerable goddess, gradually came to realize that her beloved daughter had not made her way back to their abode. Initially, a profound sense of alarm did not grip her. Persephone, with her youthful exuberance, frequently lost all track of time when she embarked upon her flower-gathering excursions, becoming so utterly engrossed in the exquisite beauty surrounding her that entire hours would dissipate like fleeting moments. Nevertheless, as the hours inexorably stretched into days, Demeter's burgeoning concern escalated into an overwhelming panic, which then transmuted into a sorrow so profoundly devastating that its very essence began to reverberate throughout the entire cosmos. One must comprehend that Demeter's grief was not merely the melancholic sadness experienced by mortals. When a deity presiding over agriculture succumbs to such profound anguish, the very earth itself echoes her lament. Consequently, verdant flora began to wither, not due to the ravages of drought or the insidious spread of disease, but from a unique form of cosmic heartbreak. The golden grain in the sprawling fields turned a desolate brown and grew brittle to the touch. Fruit-bearing trees ceased their generous production. Even the once vibrant grass started to fade into a pale, lifeless hue, reminiscent of antique photographs left exposed too long beneath the sun's relentless gaze. Yet it is the nuanced manner of this transformation that renders this ancient narrative so compelling. The radical shift did not manifest as an abrupt, cataclysmic event. Rather, it unfolded incrementally, much like observing a cherished photograph slowly losing its vibrancy over time. Farmers, with their intimate connection to the land, began to discern that their vital crops were not flourishing with their customary vigour. Gardeners tending their beloved blossoms discovered that their flowers lacked their characteristic brilliance. This was, in essence, the world's inaugural autumn, an utterly unprecedented phenomenon that no living being could comprehend. for the world had hitherto existed in a state of perpetual spring until Demeter's heart shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Concurrently, within the subterranean depths, Persephone was uncovering a dominion wholly distinct from any realm she had ever conceived. Far from being the tenebrous, terrifying abyss that most mortals envisioned, it revealed itself as an expansive, tranquil kingdom, imbued with gentle, ethereal shadows and a soft, pervasive silver luminescence that seemed to emanate from every conceivable direction and from no discernible source simultaneously. The ethereal spirits of the departed moved with serene grace through gardens adorned with black roses and shimmering silver lilies, finally liberated from the manifold pains and earthly anxieties that had troubled them during their corporeal existences. Hades, the sovereign of this netherworld, unveiled every facet of his dominion with the profound satisfaction of one revealing a cherished confidence. He guided her to the hallowed Elysian fields, where heroes and individuals of virtuous character experienced their eternal repose in a state remarkably akin to paradise. He then presented her with the mystical pools where souls could gaze upon the reflections of their loved ones, still dwelling in the world above, thereby maintaining an enduring connection across the formidable boundary separating life and death. He even introduced her to Cerberus, the formidable three-headed hound who vigilantly guarded the underworld's gates, and who, to Persephone's surprise, proved to be remarkably gentle once one became acquainted with his true nature. Nevertheless, Persephone harboured a deep yearning for the radiant warmth of the sun. She longed for the exhilarating sensation of the wind caressing her hair and the melodious symphony of birds singing at dawn. Most profoundly, she missed her mother and the vibrant, burgeoning world above. The underworld, while possessing its own unique splendour, offered a beauty characterized by endings rather than fresh beginnings, by profound peace rather than dynamic growth, by quiet reflection rather than spirited action. Hades, for his part, was endeavouring with utmost sincerity to fulfil the roles of both gracious host and devoted companion. He lavished upon her the most exquisite culinary delights his realm could provide, offering the most comfortable chambers lined with luxurious silk and precious gemstones, and presenting her with the most breathtaking gardens sculpted from shimmering silver and crystalline structures. However, there exists a crucial, immutable truth concerning the sustenance of the underworld. Once consumed, it irrevocably binds an individual to that realm in a manner that cannot be easily reversed. Persephone, acutely aware of this, diligently refrained from partaking in any food, subsisting instead on the lingering memory of sunlight and the fervent hope of returning to her home. Yet, after countless days of Hades, gentle yet persistent entreaties, and her own escalating physical weakness from prolonged fasting, she ultimately accepted a modest repast, a mere 6 pomegranate seeds, barely more than a fleeting taste. These tiny morsels were the colour of precious rubies and possessed a concentrated sweetness, as if the very essence of summer had been distilled into its purest, most potent form. Above ground, the circumstances had escalated to a dire precipice. The interminable autumn, a direct consequence of Demeter's inconsolable grief, was now threatening to transform into an endless, unforgiving winter. Humanity faced widespread starvation. Animals struggled desperately to procure sufficient sustenance. Even the Olympian gods themselves were beginning to harbour grave anxieties, for a world devoid of growth is a world incapable of sustaining its own existence. The very foundations of being were starting to fissure under the immense burden of Demeter's sorrow. Zeus, the omnipotent king of the gods, at last deemed it imperative to intercede. He dispatched Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger deity, to the underworld to negotiate Persephone's repatriation. Hermes was exceptionally suited for this delicate mission. He was one of the rare few among the divine pantheon who possessed the unique ability to traverse freely between all the diverse realms, and he possessed an unparalleled talent for devising solutions that could be embraced by all parties, even when the situation appeared utterly intractable. The discourse between Hermes and Hades, it must be noted, unfolded with a decorum and understanding far exceeding common expectation. Hades, in his essence, was not an unreasonable sovereign, merely inexperienced in the complexities of relationships and profoundly desperate for companionship. When Hermes meticulously elucidated how the upper world was succumbing to desolation without Persephone's presence, and how Demeter's unyielding grief imperiled all life on earth, Hades began to grasp the profound, far-reaching consequences of his actions. He truly had harboured no malicious intent to cause harm to anyone. But then arose the inherent complication arising from the consumption of the pomegranate seeds, because Persephone had partaken of sustenance from the underworld. She was now intrinsically connected to it in a way that could not be simply abrogated. However, given that she had consumed only 6 seeds, and because all parties involved were earnestly seeking a resolution that would preserve the world, they were able to forge a compromise that both respected the ancient, immutable laws and effectively resolved the immediate, looming crisis. Persephone, therefore, would be required to spend 6 months of each year within the underworld, in the company of Hades, 1 month for each of the 6 seeds she had consumed. For the remaining 6 months, she would return to the upper world, reunited with her mother. It was a resolution that offered complete satisfaction to none, yet it was a solution that all could, albeit reluctantly, accept. Sometimes the most efficacious answers are not those that bring unadulterated joy to everyone, but rather those that manage to distribute an equal measure of tolerable unhappiness, thereby allowing for sustainable coexistence. Thus, the rhythmic cadence of the seasons was established, like a grand cosmic rhythm that would govern the world from that day forward. When Persephone makes her triumphant return to the upper world each spring, Demeter's boundless joy causes everything to burst forth in magnificent bloom. The earth, as if awakening from a profound slumber, stirs to life. Delicate flowers push through the soil with an indomitable hope. Trees unfurl new leaves, and the world is once more enveloped in vibrant green and burgeoning growth. It is as if the entire planet takes a deep collective breath of profound relief. During the glorious summer months, when Persephone and Demeter are joyfully reunited, all of creation thrives in verdant splendour. It is a period characterized by an abundance of life and vigorous growth, by long, sun-drenched days and the bountiful fulfilment of the earth's inherent promise. Gardens overflow with succulent vegetables, orchards bend gracefully under the heavy weight of ripening fruit, and the entire living world celebrates the cherished return of the goddess who renders all growth possible. However, with the gradual approach of the appointed hour for Persephone to journey back to the underworld, Demeter begins to experience the pangs of sorrow once more, and the world commences its gentle, inevitable slide into autumn. Leaves undergo a kaleidoscopic transformation, as if mirroring the bittersweet emotions of impending separation. Bountiful harvests are diligently gathered and carefully stored. The world, in its wisdom, prepares itself for the quiet period of waiting that is winter. Consequently, winter assumes the mantle of a period of tranquil dormancy, rather than stark cessation, of quiet anticipation rather than permanent ending. It is during this time that Persephone reigns as queen of the underworld, imbuing that quiet realm with some of her inherent warmth and life, while the upper world sleeps and patiently prepares for her eventual return. Even in the coldest, darkest months there perpetually exists the comforting promise that spring will, without fail, come again. The profound elegance of this ancient narrative lies in its elucidation not merely of the changing seasons, but also of the intricate mechanisms of change itself within the tapestry of our own lives. At times, we are compelled to spend periods in darker, more introspective places, not as a form of punitive suffering, but as an integral component of a larger cyclical pattern that embraces both vibrant growth and serene rest, both effervescent joy and profound reflection, both the warmth of coming together and the necessary act of letting go. The Hellenic sages grasped the fundamental truth that perpetual summer or ceaseless spring remained an unattainable fantasy. Each distinct season bestows its own unique gifts, imparts its own invaluable lessons, and possesses its own particular kind of beauty. Winter cultivates patience and resilience. Spring inspires renewal and hope. Summer promises abundance and fulfillment. Autumn teaches the art of release and preparation. All these seasons are indispensable. All are intrinsically valuable. All constitute an essential part of the grander pattern that renders life itself conceivable. Moreover, and perhaps most crucially, this myth imparts the notion that even the most arduous transformations can ultimately lead to new, profound levels of understanding. Persephone, through her unique experiences, evolved into not merely the goddess of spring and burgeoning life, but also the sagacious queen of the underworld, an entity who possessed an unparalleled comprehension of both life and death, of both fresh beginnings and inevitable endings. Her sojourns in both realms endowed her with a wisdom and compassion far exceeding what she could have attained had she remained perpetually in the sun-drenched meadows of her idyllic childhood. As individuals navigate the variegated seasons of their own existence, whether those seasons are reflected outside their windows or within the intricate landscapes of their personal journeys, they might do well to recall Persephone's poignant story and find solace in the knowledge that all seasons, even the most challenging ones, are an intrinsic part of a larger, overarching pattern that encompasses both the sorrow of separation and the joy of reunion, both the finality of endings and the promise of new beginnings, both the necessary sadness of letting go and the inevitable comforting joy of coming home once more. While Persephone's narrative illuminated how certain transformations spring from the wellspring of affection, even when they initially appear daunting, there exist other ancient tales that speak of changes born from a different kind of love, the profound love that willingly risks everything for the sake of others. Have you ever undertaken an action that you knew would inevitably lead to trouble, yet you proceeded nonetheless, convinced of its inherent righteousness? That, precisely, is the caliber of decision that sculpts heroes and irrevocably alters the course of the world. And it is precisely that kind of momentous decision that Prometheus confronted on a pivotal day when the gods and humanity were still in the nascent stages of defining their coexistence. Prometheus was a distinguished Titan, a member of the venerable era of deities who preceded Zeus and his Olympian kin. Yet, unlike many of his ancient compatriots, Prometheus had strategically aligned himself with Zeus during the momentous conflict between the elder gods and the burgeoning new pantheon. He was celebrated for his exceptional intellect and his uncanny foresight, a gift that allowed him to gaze far into the unfolding tapestry of the future. Indeed, his very appellation aptly signified forethought, embodying the profound capacity to anticipate future events and comprehend their intricate consequences before they ever materialized. What profoundly distinguished Prometheus from the majority of the other gods was his profound affection for humanity. While numerous deities perceived mortals as either convenient servants or mere objects of amusement, Prometheus looked upon humankind and discerned a vast, untapped potential. He observed their arduous struggles for survival in a world teeming with perilous creatures and inclement climatic conditions. And in these observations he experienced an emotion seldom encountered by the celestial beings, a deep-seated sympathy. It was as if he possessed the unique ability to perceive not only humanity's current state, but also the magnificent beings they were destined to become. In those nascent epochs, human existence was markedly distinct from its contemporary form. Their days were consumed by subsisting on foraged fruits and tubers, hunting small game with rudimentary pointed branches, and seeking refuge in subterranean shelters when the sun descended. They were devoid of implements beyond natural rocks and branches. They lacked any means to process their sustenance other than laying it out under the sun's meagre heat. And when winter's biting chill arrived, they were simply compelled to withstand the cold, clinging to the hope that they had amassed sufficient provisions to endure until spring's eventual return. The gods, meanwhile, resided in sublime ease upon the majestic Mount Olympus, where they possessed an abundance of magnificent amenities that rendered their lives effortless and delightful. They partook of ambrosia and nectar, which possessed an unparalleled gustatory delight, surpassing anything on the terrestrial plane. Their resplendent abodes enjoyed perpetually temperate climes year-round. And, most crucially for our narrative, they commanded fire, not merely any conflagration, but a celestial flame that was eternally incandescent and could be harnessed to forge extraordinary marvels. Now Zeus had unequivocally decreed that fire was excessively potent and perilous to bestow upon mortals. He apprehended that if humanity gained access to fire, they would become unduly autonomous and proficient. They might neglect their due veneration of the gods, or even more alarmingly, they might presume to defy the deities themselves. It was prudent, Zeus concluded, to maintain humanity in a state of subservience and obligation, akin to progeny reliant on their progenitors for all sustenance and guidance. But Prometheus held a contrary conviction. He watched humans trembling from the frigid nocturnal air, consuming uncooked sustenance and contending with the impenetrable gloom, and he thought this suffering was gratuitously harsh. Humanity was harbouring no aspirations for dominion over the world or for achieving immortality. They simply desired thermal comfort, the ability to prepare their provisions, and a modest source of illumination when the sun departed. To Prometheus, these appeared as justifiable requirements, fundamental necessities that any empathetic entity would naturally wish to assist in satisfying. Consequently, he commenced devising a clandestine scheme. It would have to be covert and artful, for Zeus was perpetually observant, and it would need to be expeditious, because once Zeus uncovered the unfolding transgression, the retribution would be immediate and draconian. Prometheus had been meditating on this predicament for an extended period, and he had discerned a crucial detail about the operational dynamics of the divine realm. The gods, much like mortals, adhered to predictable habits, and these routines inadvertently engendered opportune moments. Every day the gods lit a magnificent hearth for their feasts and sacred rites. This fire burned in an ornate censer in the centre of their communal assembly hall, and it was maintained by various lesser deities and ethereal entities throughout the day. However, there was a brief interlude following the vespertine repast when everyone was engrossed in discourse and revelry, and the fire was bereft of supervision for a few valuable fleeting moments. Prometheus bided his time for precisely such a propitious night. The gods had been engrossed in some festive commemoration, perhaps someone's birthday or the triumphant culmination of a celestial undertaking. There were melodious strains and boisterous mirth, nectarine libations in profusion, and everyone was unburdened and jubilant. Zeus himself was immersed in animated discourse with his brothers, expansively gesticulating as he narrated some saga about his latest adventure, his voice reverberating through the palatial marble precincts. Proceeding with feigned indifference, as if merely extending his limbs after the meal, Prometheus strolled towards the great fire. He had meticulously readied himself for this juncture by bringing with him an empty ferula stem, something that appeared utterly innocuous, but could actually clandestinely convey a flame within its cavity, hidden from view. The fennel stalk was sufficiently extended to access the flames, but slender enough for facile concealment in his robes. With gestures so fluid and unforced that they eluded all scrutiny, Prometheus inserted the extremity of the fennel stalk into the celestial blaze. The flame ignited within the internal chamber, imperceptible externally, but steadfastly glowing internally. He then sealed the aperture with a small earthen plug, encapsulating the fire as a covert revelation. The whole process took under 60 seconds, and to any unwary onlooker he was just tending to the hearth in the manner of people at gatherings. The subsequent hurdle proved most formidable, departing the Olympian heights without inciting any misgivings. Prometheus could not abruptly vanish, because that would be instantly perceived. Instead, he had to engage in courteous dialogue, chuckle amiably at the Olympian's jests, and progressively gravitate towards the periphery of the assembly, as if he were simply preparing for his return abode after an agreeable soiree. Each passing moment stretched into an eternity. Every innocuous inquiry from another god seemed akin to an intense cross-examination. Finally, he managed to discreetly extricate himself from the celestial revelry and commence his downward trajectory to the human realm. This was a journey that typically required considerable duration, even for a deity. But Prometheus was impelled by a pressing imperative. Each instant of procrastination was another moment Zeus might uncover the absence, another opportunity for his stratagem to be exposed prior to its successful execution. He located a cluster of mortals encamped beside a fluvial margin, the very community whose plight had occupied his thoughts and solicitude for many lunar cycles. They were congregated closely to mitigate the frigid conditions, masticating unprocessed tubers and desiccated animal flesh, anticipating the dawn's arrival so they could discern sufficiently to seek additional sustenance. Their visages bore the imprint of fatigue and stoicism, showing the resilient fortitude of people accustomed to meagre expectations from their existence. Prometheus advanced towards them deliberately and without haste, desirous of not startling them. Deities seldom made direct visitations to the human sphere, and when they did, it frequently presaged ill tidings. But a certain benignity and solace emanated from Prometheus's bearing. He descended to their level, settling amongst them with an air of belonging, and meticulously unsealed the earthen stopper from his fennel stalk. What happened next must have seemed like the most astonishing enchantment these humans had ever beheld. A luminous spark materialized seemingly ex nihilo, flickering vivaciously from the tip of Prometheus's staff. But this was no ordinary conflagration. It was celestial blaze which glowed with enhanced luminosity and pristine purity beyond any terrestrial combustion they had ever seen, imparting illumination and thermal comfort in exquisite equilibrium. Prometheus demonstrated the method for nourishing the flame with desiccated timber and foliage, how to dampen its intensity for a protracted nocturnal glow, and how to use it to prepare their sustenance, rendering it both more salubrious and palatable than anything they had previously sampled. He instructed them in the fabrication of flambeaux so they could bear illumination during their peregrinations. He even showed them how to use fire to fortify the tips of their hunting lances and to repel menacing fauna. But the gift of fire transcended mere utilitarian function. It was the dawn of human societal development itself. With fire, humans could labor beyond daylight hours, prolonging their periods of industry. They could inhabit frigid regions, enlarging their domains. They could refine culinary practices which resulted in enhanced sustenance and greater leisure for pursuits beyond basic foraging. They could congregate amidst the thermal comfort and effulgence to narrate sagas, to formulate strategies, to evolve beyond solitary beings contending for existence. Most importantly, fire gave humans a feeling of mastery and dominion over their surroundings that they had hitherto never known. For the first time, they could actively alter their conditions instead of passively tolerating them. They could ameliorate their existence via their ingenuity and diligence. The celestial spark bestowed by Prometheus truly embodied the very beacon of aspiration. Back on Olympus, it was not protracted before Zeus perceived a distinct alteration. The celestial flame exhibited a diminished intensity, and there were accounts from fellow deities about unfamiliar illuminations observed in the human sphere beneath. When Zeus comprehended the transgression, his fury erupted with immediate and terrifying vehemence, rocking the fundamental structures of the Olympian abode. But here is the intriguing aspect of Zeus's response. He was incensed not merely by the act of appropriation itself, but by its profound symbolic implications. Prometheus had flouted an explicit celestial edict. Yes, but furthermore he had shown that he prioritized the well-being of mortals above the supremacy of divine prerogative. This was precisely the ideological stance that Zeus had harbored apprehension concerning, the type of established example capable of subverting the entirety of the cosmic arrangement. The retribution meticulously conceived by Zeus for Prometheus was engineered for both its draconian harshness and its profound emblematic significance. Prometheus was fettered to a towering summit within the formidable Caucasus range, secured by adamantine shackles, impervious to the might of any cosmic power. Yet this was not the most dreadful aspect of his sentence. Mere chains proved insufficient to appease Zeus's profound sense of retribution. With each dawn, a colossal eagle would descend upon the craggy peaks where Prometheus lay bound. This predatory bird would rend asunder Prometheus's side, voraciously consuming his liver, thereby inflicting agonizing torment. However, owing to Prometheus's inherent immortality, his vital organ would regenerate fully restored by the following morning. In an unceasing cycle, the eagle would invariably reappear the subsequent day to recommence its gruesome feast. The design of this punishment was conceived as perpetual, an unending rotation of suffering and spontaneous healing. This particular retribution was intended to persist until such time as Prometheus consented to offer contrition and pledged never again to meddle with the celestial decree. Zeus remained convinced that eventually the relentless sameness and excruciating pain would shatter even Prometheus's unyielding resolve. After all, eternity constitutes an exceedingly protracted duration in which to suffer for a solitary transgression. Nevertheless, it is at this juncture that the narrative ascends to a profoundly extraordinary level. Despite the ceaseless torment he endured daily, notwithstanding the profound solitude and the boundless recurrence of his affliction, Prometheus remained steadfast in his choice to aid humankind. When other deities visited his desolate perch and proposed a cessation of his punishment by merely expressing remorse to Zeus, he consistently declined, even when the intensity of his pain rendered articulation arduous. His rationale was straightforward yet deeply significant. He had witnessed the burgeoning potential of mortals when equipped with the means to enhance their existence. Even from his craggy confinement he could discern the tendrils of smoke unfurling from their fires spreading across the world. He understood that they were preparing more nourishing sustenance, warding off the chill of colder seasons, and commencing to cultivate intellectual and practical disciplines that the boon of flame had enabled. Every day of pain, Prometheus firmly believed, was a worthwhile endeavour because it had secured an immeasurable boon for humanity, and humans, for their part, eternally cherished the memory of what Prometheus had done for them. They bestowed upon him the epithet of Pyrophoros, the fire-bringer, and recounted sagas celebrating his valour and selflessness. Some even posited that the genesis of human intellect, creativity and affection stemmed from Prometheus, having infused a portion of his ethereal essence into them along with the gift of fire. In their creative expressions and lyrical compositions they revered him not as a deity subjected to retribution, but as a champion who prioritized benevolence above personal security. Ultimately, following countless ages, Prometheus was liberated from his torment. However, that is a different narrative reserved for a subsequent tranquil night. The pertinent lesson for this present moment involves comprehending what his selfless act signified and why he was prepared to withstand such immense suffering for the benefit of mortals with whom he had scant acquaintance. It was devoid of aspirations for renown, acclamation, or even appreciation. Rather, it was about discerning inherent capabilities within humanity and being prepared to bear the cost to facilitate the actualization of that promise. Perhaps it is because Prometheus grasped a truth that had eluded Zeus in his preoccupation with preserving dominion and cosmic equilibrium. The most profound endowment one can bestow upon someone is neither solace nor security, but the instrumentalities requisite for forging their individual well-being and protection. Fire, therefore, transcended mere thermal regulation or culinary application. It embodied the fundamental tenet advocating humanity's entitlement to an opportunity to elevate their personal circumstances, to evolve beyond their rudimentary state. And maybe that is why this venerable narrative continues to resonate in contemporary times as we gently succumb to slumber, pondering our volitional decisions and the sacrifices we are prepared to render for the convictions we hold dear. Every time someone jeopardizes personal ease for the betterment of fellow beings, every time someone elects to disseminate wisdom or assets that could contribute to global amelioration, they are emulating the path of the colossal Prometheus, the Titan, who concluded that certain ideals merit profound endurance, and that the illumination we extend to others remains undiminished through its dissemination. Do you recall how Prometheus apprehended the necessity of unconventional cogitation to resolve intractable dilemmas? Well, there is a distinct account illustrating divergent thought processes, though this one emanates from the arena of mortal conflict rather than the celestial domain of gods. After a decade of protracted warfare, the combatants on both sides were afflicted by a profound weariness transcending mere physical fatigue. They were exhausted to their very marrow and spirit, weary of protracted separation from kin and hearth, and tired of contending for an objective whose clarity waned with the progression of each passing season. And it was within this pervading ambience of fatigue and yearning that a stratagem of unparalleled historical renown was conceived, born not from malice or animosity, but from the unadorned aspiration of myriad warriors to at last return to their spouses and progeny, and the tranquil existences they had relinquished so many years prior. The conflict at Troy had persisted for such an extended duration that some of the junior combatants possessed no vivid recollection of what pre-war existence entailed. They had matured amidst military encampments, acquired their skills during lulls in hostilities, and forged their most profound bonds beneath the looming ramparts of a city that appeared impregnable, despite strenuous attempts at penetration. For them, conflict had transformed from an activity into an intrinsic aspect of their identity. Troy itself was an extraordinary metropolis, perched atop an eminence commanding views of the Aegean, boasting ramparts of immense girth and towering height that seemed to have been fashioned by cyclopean hands rather than mortal architects. The masonry interlocked with such flawless precision that it prevented the insertion of even the thinnest implement, and these walls ascended from the terrain as if organic precipices, creating the impression that the urban sprawl had organically emerged from the geomorphology rather than being constructed upon its summit. The Trojans inside possessed abundant provisions and potable resources, robust fortifications, and the strategic benefit of engaging on their native soil. They were intimately familiar with every thoroughfare and alleyway, every secret passage and hidden portal. The Hellenes encamped beyond the walls possessed numerical supremacy and some of the most formidable combatants globally. Yet, subsequent to 10 years of persistent endeavour, they had achieved negligible advancement. Their efforts were akin to assailing a massif with rudimentary tools, arduous labour yielding no perceptible outcome. It was Odysseus, sovereign of the Aegean isle of Ithaca, who ultimately conceived the stratagem that would bring the conflict to a conclusion. Odysseus was renowned for his sagacity, not the ostentatious theatrical form of intellect that generates eloquent orations, but the pragmatic, solution-oriented variety that devises methods for achieving objectives when conventional methodologies have proven inadequate. He possessed an intellectual faculty capable of scrutinizing an insurmountable predicament and perceiving the singular, subtle elements overlooked by all others. He had been contemplating the dilemma of Ilion for an extended period, assiduously examining the urban fortifications by daylight and remaining vigilant through the nocturnal hours, observing the remote beacons illuminating the ramparts, and attending to the subtle murmurs of internal existence. He scrutinized the quotidian habits of its protectors, seeking any vulnerability or recurring behavior amenable to manipulation, and incrementally he commenced the formulation of a concept that possessed such elegant simplicity and daring temerity that its efficacy seemed plausible. The scheme he presented to the Hellenic military leaders was divergent from all prior methodologies. Instead of attempting to demolish Ilion's fortifications or subdue its garrisons through deprivation, they would endeavour to deceive the inhabitants of Troy into willingly unbarring their portals. This approach would necessitate meticulous dissimulation, exacting temporal coordination, and a degree of peril that induced apprehension among certain commanders. However, after a decade of orthodox military engagement, they were prepared to embrace an heterodox approach. The linchpin of Odysseus's strategy was an equine effigy crafted from timber. But this was no ordinary simulacrum of a steed. This would be a consummate work of artistry, of such monumental scale and aesthetic splendour that it would appear as a votive offering fit for the Olympians themselves. It needed to be sufficiently magnificent to captivate Trojan regard and pique their inquisitiveness, but also sufficiently capacious to conceal a contingent of Hellenic warriors within its belly. Crucially, it needed to convincingly simulate a bona fide Greek ex voto, something the Greeks would genuinely leave behind as a religious tribute. The fabrication of the equine structure evolved into an undertaking that engrossed the entirety of the Hellenic encampment for an extended period. They had to procure suitable lumber, robust enough to bear the combined mass of the edifice and its concealed occupants, yet sufficiently manageable in mass to permit its actual translocation. They needed to engineer concealed entryways and ventilation apertures that would remain imperceptible from external vantage points. Most importantly, they had to fashion an artifact of such exquisite beauty that the Trojans would eagerly desire its conveyance within their urban precincts. The principal artisan selected for this endeavour was Epeius, a Greek who was more celebrated for his manual dexterity than martial prowess. He undertook the assignment with an equivalent degree of diligence and scrupulousness he might have devoted to the erection of a sacred edifice or a royal residence. The equine effigy, progressively materializing beneath his touch, proved resplendent, adorned with elaborate embellishments, and then adorned with pigment and burnished to a sheen reminiscent of sun-kissed bronze, with each sinew and fascicle depicted with unimpeachable verisimilitude. But concurrently with the fabrication of the wooden steed, a correlatively crucial component of the strategy was materializing. The Hellenes were compelled to instill conviction in the Trojans that they had relinquished their siege and departed for their homelands. This extended beyond the mere concealment of the internal warrior contingent. It required orchestrating the plausible vanishing of the entire Hellenic host. After a decade of unremitting encampment, their abrupt disappearance needed to convey both credibility and finality. The resolution involved navigating the armada to a proximate insular landmass, where they would be undetectable from Ilian's defensive structures, yet sufficiently near to permit rapid re-engagement upon receiving the designated sign. The majority of the military contingent would accompany the naval vessels, retaining solely the warriors secreted within the equine effigy, and a solitary willing participant who would remain to relate to the Trojans a meticulously fabricated narrative. The Greek strategy hinged upon the daring performance of a single volunteer, Sinon, a soldier entrusted with arguably the most perilous assignment of the entire scheme. His role necessitated a deliberate capture by the Trojan forces, followed by a meticulously crafted deception designed to persuade them of his status as a genuine deserter, privy to crucial intelligence concerning the enigmatic wooden effigy. This narrative, a tapestry of fabrication, demanded an extraordinary level of verisimilitude, sufficient to beguile a populace inherently inclined towards profound skepticism, yet compelling enough to manipulate them into fulfilling the precise objectives of the Greek strategists. As the dawn light broke upon the fateful morning designated for the execution of this elaborate stratagem, the inhabitants of Troy awoke to an astonishing spectacle, an occurrence entirely beyond their wildest conjectures. The sprawling encampment of their Greek adversaries lay utterly deserted. The formidable fleet of ships that had, for a decade, densely populated their harbour had inexplicably vanished from the azure waters. The remnants of cooking fires were cold and lifeless. The myriad tents had been meticulously dismantled, all military equipment meticulously stowed, and the colossal army that had for so long laid siege to their proud city had simply dissipated, much like a fleeting dream dissolving with the first rays of morning. The only discernible vestiges of their prolonged occupation were a smattering of miscellaneous detritus and, starkly solitary upon the sandy expanse of the beach, a colossal equine effigy crafted from wood. The initial response emanating from the Trojan populace was one of profound yet circumspect incredulity. Following a protracted decade of unceasing conflict, the abrupt vanishing of their formidable antagonists appeared almost impossibly fortuitous, a stroke of luck too grand to be entirely genuine. Consequently, vigilant scouts were immediately dispatched to meticulously scour the abandoned enemy encampment, their mission to unearth any telltale indicators of a clandestine trap, while other observers ascended to the most elevated watchtowers, their gazes sweeping the vast expanse of the horizon for the faintest glimpse of the departing Greek armada. Yet the cerulean sea stretched unimpeded and vacant towards the distant sky, and the vacated camp, upon closer inspection, exhibited every characteristic of a hurried yet unequivocally authentic withdrawal. With the passage of several hours and the persistent absence of any discernible snare, a palpable wave of exhilaration began to ripple through the besieged city. A collective question hung in the air. Could this protracted ordeal genuinely be at an end? Had the Greeks, after a decade of relentless siege, at last conceded defeat and embarked upon their homeward voyage? The colossal wooden horse, a silent sentinel upon the shore, swiftly became the epicenter of fervent curiosity and animated discourse. A segment of the populace found its craftsmanship aesthetically pleasing, deeming it a work of art. Conversely, others perceived it as an object of ill omen, imbued with an unsettling aura, though a universal consensus held that its presence was utterly impossible to disregard. A contingent of Trojans vociferously contended that it was, beyond doubt, a cunning ruse of some sort, necessitating its immediate demolition. Yet another faction posited that it was unequivocally a sacred votive offering, purposefully abandoned to placate the deities for the Greeks' ultimate failure to subdue the city. A more pragmatic minority even ventured that its intrinsic value alone might warrant its preservation, irrespective of its original design or intent. This impassioned colloquy, characterized by robust arguments from every conceivable perspective, persisted for several arduous hours. It was precisely amidst the fervent exchanges of this protracted deliberation that Sinon was ultimately brought to light, found secreted within the desolate remnants of the Greek encampment, seemingly endeavouring with great earnestness to elude detection. Upon his presentation before the esteemed Trojan leaders, the captive Sinon projected a demeanour of profound trepidation and a marked disinclination to articulate his thoughts. This, naturally, was precisely the carefully cultivated impression he aspired to convey. Such an exhibition of genuine fear and profound reluctance to engage in immediate dialogue proved infinitely more persuasive and credible than any display of eager or overly cooperative behaviour, which might have instantly aroused suspicion. The elaborate narrative meticulously spun by Sinon was ingeniously constructed to resonate profoundly with his astute understanding of Trojan psychological vulnerabilities and aspirations. He asserted his identity as a desperate deserter, having precipitously abandoned the Greek military ranks subsequent to his ignominious selection as a human sacrifice, an offering intended to propitiate the gods and guarantee auspicious winds for the Greeks' homeward voyage. The colossal wooden horse, he further elucidated, was unequivocally a sacred oblation, specifically fabricated to assuage the wrath of the goddess Athena, whom the Greeks had grievously affronted by their audacious theft of a hallowed statue from her revered sanctuary within the very walls of Troy. However, the veritable linchpin of his intricate fabrication lay in the subsequent revelation. Sinon divulged that the Greeks had intentionally engineered the horse to be of such immense proportions that it would prove impossible to maneuver through Troy's fortified gateways. This calculated design, he explained, stemmed from a dire pronouncement by an ancient oracle, which foretold that should the Trojans ever succeed in conveying the colossal effigy within the confines of their city, Troy would forthwith be imbued with the divine favour of Athena, rendering it utterly impregnable and forever beyond the reach of any future conqueror. The Greeks, Sinon vehemently contended, had thus constructed the horse on an enormous scale precisely to obstruct this prophesied outcome. This particular piece of intelligence was precisely the soothing balm the Trojans yearned to hear, appealing directly to their deepest desires for security and divine protection. It implied that far from posing a threat, bringing the horse within their city walls would not only be entirely safe, but would in fact fortify their defences and elevate their security to an unprecedented level. Consequently, the protracted discussion concerning the horse's ultimate fate underwent an abrupt and dramatic reorientation, shifting from a cautious assessment of its potential perils to an urgent deliberation on the swiftest possible means of introducing it within their formidable ramparts. Abruptly, the notion of abandoning such a potent symbol on the exposed beach seemed akin to squandering an unparalleled, divinely ordained opportunity. the monumental task of transporting the enormous wooden horse through the city's ancient gateways necessitated an extraordinary feat of engineering prowess. The venerable gates themselves had to be significantly broadened, and substantial segments of the formidable city wall required temporary dismantling to accommodate its bulk. This arduous undertaking consumed the better part of the day and demanded the collective strength and coordinated efforts of hundreds of individuals. Nevertheless, by evening, the magnificent wooden horse proudly stood within the central square of Troy, encircled by jubilant citizens whose hearts swelled with the conviction that they had not merely achieved a hard-won victory, but had secured an inviolable, perpetual assurance of their beloved city's enduring safety. On that memorable night, the city of Troy erupted in a paroxysm of joyous celebration, a revelry unmatched in its intensity over the preceding 10 years of protracted warfare. The streets thrummed with the vibrant energy of widespread feasting and copious drinking, accompanied by the lilting strains of music and uninhibited dancing. A profound sense of liberation permeated the air. The war, at long last, was unequivocally concluded. Their cherished city was secure, and they possessed a magnificent, tangible trophy to unequivocally corroborate this triumphant reality. As the hours of the night gradually advanced and the festivities escalated in their fervour, the Trojan populace, one by one, began to meander homeward to their respective beds, utterly spent from the intoxicating blend of excitement and profound relief. They succumbed to a slumber more profound and undisturbed than any they had experienced in an entire decade. Yet, concealed within the hollow confines of the colossal wooden horse, a select contingent of Greek warriors endured a period of cramped, uncomfortable, and utterly silent vigil. They had remained ensconced within their clandestine sanctuary for nearly 2 full days, their movements severely restricted, subsisting on meagre rations of food and water. Throughout this arduous confinement, they had keenly absorbed the ambient sounds of the bustling city surrounding them, patiently anticipating the opportune moment for their clandestine emergence. Despite the pervasive ache in every muscle and the debilitating stiffness in every joint, they maintained their arduous weight with the stoic patience characteristic of individuals who possessed an unwavering certainty that their pivotal moment was, at last, drawing nigh. As the city finally descended into a profound stillness, and the very last of the jubilant revellers had unsteadily made their way back to their abodes, the astute Odysseus issued the prearranged signal. The cleverly concealed panel in the horse's cavernous belly swung open without a sound, and one by one the Greek warriors descended with hushed precision into the moon-drenched central square of Troy. They navigated the slumbering metropolis with the spectral grace of phantoms, their footsteps deliberately muffled, their weapons held poised for immediate action, yet harbouring a fervent hope that their use would prove unnecessary. Their immediate and paramount objective was to covertly reach the formidable city gates and unbar them for the remainder of the Greek army, which, under the shrouding cloak of darkness, had silently sailed back and now lay in wait, just beyond the imposing fortifications. This particular phase of the operation represented, without question, the most perilous segment of the entire meticulously crafted scheme. Should the Trojans, by some unfortunate twist of fate, become cognizant of the unfolding treachery before the gates were successfully unsealed, the diminutive contingent of Greeks would find themselves irrevocably ensnared within the city, utterly devoid of any prospect for either escape or timely reinforcement. Fortuitously, both propitious circumstances and meticulous forethought conspired in their favour. The Trojan populace, utterly depleted by the preceding revelries and lulled into a false sense of absolute security, behind their supposedly impenetrable walls, slumbered in profound oblivion. The Greek warriors, moving with an eerie stealth, successfully reached the colossal gates without encountering so much as a solitary sentinel. Within a mere handful of minutes, they had efficiently disengaged the massive bars and formidable chains that had for 10 arduous years served as an unyielding barrier against their formidable army. The grand gates of Troy, those symbols of enduring defiance, swung inward on their silent hinges. And in that pivotal moment, the conflict that had endured for a full decade was, to all intents and purposes, irrevocably concluded. The ensuing events unfolded with astonishing celerity and unassailable decisiveness, yet there lingers an almost anticlimactic quality to the sheer rapidity with which the entire protracted conflict was brought to its conclusion, once the ingenious stratagem had been successfully deployed. Following a decade characterized by relentless siege warfare, by the epic duels of legendary heroes in single combat, by the intricate tapestry of grand strategic maneuvers and desperate last-ditch defences, the ultimate chapter of this storied conflict was penned not by the raw power of the sword, but rather by the incisive brilliance of clever thought and the unwavering resolve of patient execution. It stood as an eloquent testament to the undeniable ascendancy of intellect over unrefined brute force, a profound victory achieved through meticulous foresight and calculated planning, rather than through direct frontal confrontation. The enduring pedagogical significance embedded within the narrative of the Trojan horse transcends a mere commentary on the ingenious cunning of the Greeks, or the perceived credulity of the Trojans. More profoundly, it illuminates the fundamental principle that viable solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges frequently emerge from a radical shift in perspective, from the audacious act of approaching a predicament from an entirely unforeseen or unconventional angle. There are instances where the most straightforward route proves not merely to be the most arduous, but indeed utterly unattainable. In such circumstances, wisdom often dictates a strategic retreat, an opportunity to re-evaluate the problem from a novel vantage point, thereby discovering an ingenious bypass rather than stubbornly attempting a direct, unyielding penetration. Furthermore, one might discern within this ancient saga a potent cautionary tale concerning the inherent peril of succumbing to the conviction that any triumph is immutable, or that any defensive barrier is utterly impregnable. The Trojans had, against all odds, valiantly weathered a decade-long siege, successfully repelling every assault and outmanoeuvring every strategic maneuver their adversaries could possibly conceive. Their profound reliance upon the formidable strength of their walls and the unwavering vigilance of their sentinels was, by all logical measures, entirely justified, until, that is, the moment it ceased to be so. The most robust and seemingly unassailable fortifications can, on occasion, be breached not through overwhelming might, but rather by subtly engineering a scenario wherein the very defenders themselves are compelled by circumstance or persuasion to willingly dismantle or compromise their own protective measures. As our thoughts meander towards the tranquil embrace of sleep, contemplating the profound resonance of this ancient narrative, we are perhaps afforded a unique opportunity to fully appreciate both the unparalleled ingenuity exhibited by Odysseus and the poignant, inescapable tragedy that befell the city of Troy. It serves as a stark illustration of the boundless capacity of human cleverness to untangle seemingly intractable dilemmas, yet simultaneously underscores the sombre truth that trust, once irrevocably shattered by deceit, can rarely, if ever, be fully restored to its original pristine state. Thus, the iconic wooden horse endures as a powerful, silent memento, a testament to the unsettling reality that the most outwardly appealing or seemingly benevolent offerings can, at times, exact the most exorbitant and devastating costs. It further serves to profoundly illustrate that the human intellect, when judiciously and artfully deployed, possesses a potency that can far eclipse the combined might of all the world's formidable armies. One might recall how Odysseus, with his characteristic sagacity, grasped the profound truth that even the most intricate and convoluted challenges frequently yield to remarkably straightforward and elegant resolutions. Indeed, there exists yet another compelling narrative,